Yeah. And we should be live. Hi, everyone. Please drop a 1 in the chat if you are able to hear me. My apologies. This is entirely my fault that we are so late. And yeah, um, let's see. Thaddeus, are you seeing ones in the chat?
I am not. Oh, I just saw it go live on YouTube. So with the delay, people are just now getting it, I imagine.
And yes, we are live now. Thank you, guys. I do sincerely apologize. This was entirely my fault. And also, I'm having another technical issue. Maybe I should switch to that new streaming platform Thaddeus uses, so that I don't have to have these typical issues with OBS. And my deepest apologies, everyone. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Thaddeus, for being my guest today, for coming on my channel, I believe for the first time.
Yeah, I think so. We've tried to get it together a couple of times, but I don't think I've ever actually made it on your channel, which is crazy considering you've been on my channel probably, I don't know, 30 times.
That is probably the case, yes. Yes, so we are live. So, guys, we have XYZ. Obviously, we have a guy called Reasoned Answers in the chat. Chris Azero, Bob Fisher, Kurag, and Carol B. Thanks, Carol B. Yeah, so many of the regulars and some new faces. Well, thanks, guys. Yeah, me and my technical issues. Paul Ank, echo. Why are we having echo? We should not be having
they're
echo.
saying they get when I talk at least. Don't hear anything on my end. Don't hear anything on my end. I don't have the YouTube sound or anything.
Yeah,
so it's not coming from me.
You know what? This is why. Let me disable that. And now, everyone, Thaddeus, please say something.
Hello. Still echoing? Still? We shall see.
Echo from Thaddeus, yeah. That should be gone now.
We'll have to wait a second for people to catch up, but hopefully it's better.
Okay, yes, it's gone now.
Awesome. Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, I use OBS and it duplicates the input streams. This is why. And of course, Thaddeus has now disappeared again. I have no idea why it does this. My apologies, but OBS seems to have lost the plot once again. I'm gonna have to adjust this now live and on the fly. This is the
I see my yes, this is a bit humorous. I'm now like 10 pixels wide and 500 tall.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, I'm having to do this. Yeah, I am not certain why that would be. So Thaddeus, I'm gonna have to remove your video right now. So I've got your logo, I believe, on the screen. Yeah, me and my infamous technical issues. Oh, okay, well, Thaddeus, welcome, and please tell the audience why you're here today and what we're discussing.
And now people are saying all the audio is gone.
That cannot be the case. We definitely have audio going out. This is just crazy. There's no reason for us not to have audio. So all the audio is gone. That cannot be the case, guys.
Okay, now people are saying audio is back.
Okay, so interestingly, I often experience major audio issues with YouTube, and it seems to affect some people, and it's random. But I get the feeling that YouTube has issues with my channel, and it deliberately does these things because I get stutter, I get serious audio issues, and I have your image back. That is.
All
So
right.
yeah,
Yes.
I feel like a right idiot again, and yeah. So you were saying that we don't properly understand Islam, and why do you
Yeah.
say that?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what people heard, but I think that we'll get into this a little bit more as we go along. But I think that Christians kind of approach Islam as similar to Christianity, teaches different things, has different ideas, but fundamentally is similar in that it's structured around a set of religious scriptures. It is a system of moral teachings. The primary thing in Islam Christians would believe is about following God. They have different ideas about how to do that. And as I've discovered, that's not really the case. The fundamental way that Muslims think about their religion is different than the fundamental way that Christians think about their religion.
Correct. Christianity is not a religion of law, and Muslims always try to claim that Christianity is a religion of law, that the New Testament issues legislation, which is actual legal rulings which are utilized in courts of law and to dictate how we run life at a civil level. Whereas Islam is that legal system. The Sharia is that legal system. And it's even, in fact, Islam defines itself as a political system, which is the word deen.
Yes, as we get into it, and we're going to see that, and we're going to see some other things as well. And because Muslims have such a different understanding of their religion, fundamentally, not just in like specific topics, but fundamentally different idea about what religion is, they make bizarre arguments about Christianity that we don't necessarily really know how to respond to. I mean, like they seem so stupid that we respond, but we don't necessarily respond in a way that's beneficial to Muslims because their understanding is so different. And likewise, we're not necessarily speaking the language that Muslims understand because we're speaking from our religious perspective and they're coming at it from a completely different angle.
Yeah, and they seem impervious to actually seeing Christianity as it is. And in fact, some of you who are new here won't realize, and I've said this before to those who are familiar with me, that Muslims will always say, "Why are you spreading hate?" When you accurately, and I know as Christians, we attempt to accurately, honestly state what the exact words within the Hadith, within the Quran, within the Tafsir, within the seerah. We present these accurately and honestly. And Muslims say, "Why are you spreading hate?" That is in the Sharia law. It falls under two, well, there are more than one law, but it falls under three laws. Rasab al Rasul, which is insulting Muhammad. Two, it falls under Riba, which is slander. And three, Namima, which is backbiting or telling tales about someone. Now, basically, these laws state that if you say something that is true, that someone would not like known, that is slander. In Western law, slander is when you lie about someone and you damage their reputation because you lied, that is slander. In Islam, to tell the truth that someone would not like to hear, that is slander. There's a second addition to slander where they call it backbiting or namima, where if you say something that causes friction between two parties, that damages a relationship, that causes friction, this is a crime. And this is when you say something that is true but worsens a relationship. Now, of course, Muslims want a good relationship. They want to be seen as good. And thus, telling the truth is hateful because it creates this friction. And there are a series of other laws, but also telling the truth about Muhammad would slander Muhammad under Islam. So therefore, this is illegal and we are spreading hate.
Yeah, absolutely. Arnold said not only different religious perspective, but different logical and intellectual traditions. And that's what I'm getting at. It's not just, we have different ideas about what happened in history, different ideas about what is true. We have fundamentally different ideas of how the world works. We're looking at things from a completely different perspective. And to what Lloyd was talking about, we saw that in action this past week, that a Indian politician, a lady, was having a talk or debate, I'm not sure exactly what, with some Muslims. And they insulted one of her gods, and she responded by saying, in the Hadith, we learn that Muhammad married a 6-year-old and had sex with her when she was 9. Do you want me talking about that? If not, then you should shut up about my gods. And it's now a major international news story that Muslims are rioting over this. And she literally said stuff that every Muslim believes, and that every Muslim who is informed about their religion believes, that they teach in Muslim majority countries is perfectly normal. But because it is damaging to Muslim reputation in India, that was slanderous in their opinion.
Correct. So it is upside down and backwards. Welcome, Sergeant Grinch. Good to have you here. Yeah, this is Islam. By the way, I just recorded about 14 episodes with Al-Fadi. Those episodes will air in July, and there will be a detailed step-by-step walkthrough of Sharia law from first principles, from the basics, with examples. So it's going to be like think of it as a university course. And in fact, Al-Fadi has mentioned to me that we may discuss the option of turning this into an actual course, an apologetic style course to teach the Sharia, which I would be very honored to do and to help and assist him with. So yes, so it's very different to sort of jumping from topic to topic. I will be going through this in clear, basic detail.
Excellent. And I'm looking forward to seeing that for sure.
Right, so please continue, Thaddeus. So tell us,
all right. So
you said your views have changed. So what changed the views? How did they change?
Well, let me go ahead and dive into the presentation here. So before getting into what I learned, I thought it would be beneficial just for the set basis, any Muslim watching, for Christians, just kind of set a basis of where I was coming from and where the average Christian comes from when they learn about Islam. So first question is, what does the average church say about Islam? And no, this isn't an error. The slide is blank.
It's an Abrahamic religion.
Because churches do not teach about Islam. And it's not necessarily that they don't want to talk about Islam or they're offended by Islam or something. Christian churches have this radical idea that the truth of Christianity is based on the teachings of Christianity, and that Christians want to learn the teachings of Christianity. So that's what churches focus on. They don't talk about Islam. They don't talk about Hinduism. They don't talk about Buddhism. They don't talk about anything other than Christianity. There might be an occasional church that's an exception, but this is the case for the vast majority of Christian churches. You go to church, you learn about Christianity. You go to a mosque, and that's not necessarily the case. You don't necessarily learn just about Islam. You do talk about people who are not Muslims. You talk about how wonderful it is that Allah has blessed you to be a Muslim, because all the other people are filthy, disgusting creatures. And the last thing in the world you want to be is a Christian, because Christians are horrible, immoral people. So this is what I'm saying is not strange to any Christian, but it might be a little strange to Muslims who hear something very different when they go to mosque, and for that reason assume that Christians do the same. We get comments all the time. Why do Christians hate Muslims? Why are Christians so obsessed with Muslims? Why do Christians spend so much time talking about Islam? And the reality is we don't.
We spend zero time talking about Islam in church. Actually, Thaddeus, if I may interject, remember I mentioned that it's illegal under Islamic law, under multiple laws, to slander Islam, to speak poorly of it, because Islam is perfect. However, within Islam, slander is of others, non-Muslims, is permissible. In fact, they have 6 categories of what they call in their legal system permissible slander. Wow. So what's good for the goose is definitely not good for the gander.
Yeah, Islam is a very exclusive religion, a very projects a feeling of superiority over everyone else. We have this idea in the West that all religions are kind of similar. They're kind of all the same. Islam does not have any similar conception. The average Muslim thinks that they are vastly superior to anyone who follows any other religion, and especially Christianity. So if we don't learn about Islam in our churches, and we probably don't learn a lot about it in school either, what does the average Christian
If I could just
know
pause, I just
about
altered the screen for a
Islam?
second. You can see here's the ruling on permissible slander. Slander is permitted. So just wanted to show you guys that slander is permitted. Yeah. Please continue, Thaddeus.
Which is crazy because slander, as they've defined it, is anything that offends a Muslim. But I guess here they're changing the definition and using a more normal definition of slander when they say it's sometimes permissible.
Yeah, it's hypocrisy. This is Islam. It's just insane hypocrisy. Yeah.
Yep. So now that we've covered that Christians don't learn anything about Islam in church, and we don't talk about in secular education classes either. So what does the average Christian know? Well, we do know some things. We absorb some things from pop culture, just from hearing news stories and whatnot. And the average Christian does know that Muhammad was the founder of Islam and that he claimed to be the last prophet of God. We know that Muslims follow the Quran and are highly offended if this book is mistreated. Of course, that's a bit of a misnomer, since we're going to find that Muslims don't actually necessarily follow the Quran, or at least that it's not the primary source of Islam. But this is what the average Christian believes, not necessarily what's true.
It's interesting that you're now saying this when I met you, that probably wasn't your view. If I may say, Arnold Nathaniel says, how is Islam Abrahamic? Now, historically, there are no references to Islam being Abrahamic prior to a certain date where the Jews rejected Muhammad. So at a certain point in history, the Jews rejected Muhammad's story, and that is when, within the written record, within the historical record, he suddenly makes the claim to assert the superiority and the dominance of Islam as in the line of Abraham and thus superior to Christianity and Judaism. So this is he suddenly makes that, and that's one of the Western European scholars discusses that. Yeah, please continue, Thaddeus.
Yeah, exactly. They make this claim, but that doesn't make it valid. It's just a claim. And you're right that this isn't even necessarily something that was claimed originally of Islam. As we're going to find out, a lot of Islam came much later than the time of Muhammad, if we want to call the founder of Islam Muhammad. In addition, Christians generally know that depictions of Muhammad lead to riots. Muslims, I'm sorry, but actions speak louder than words. So you can go around saying that Islam's a religion of peace and Muslims are perfectly reasonable and nice people all you want, but we absorb from news stories and such that Muslims have these, to what are us, absolutely insane reactions when people draw pictures of Muhammad, make fun of him, whatever the case may be. And to us, that makes it look like Muhammad is your deity, that Muhammad is your God, because these reactions don't make any sense if he's just a human being. The average Christian also believes that while terrorists claim to be Muslims, they actually aren't, because, as we all know, Islam is all about peace and love. At least that's what we absorb from our pop culture. Christians also know that Muslim women are required to cover themselves. We might think that this is a little quaint or odd, but it's not necessarily something that really bothers the average Christian. We just notice it because, frankly, it's quite obvious that Muslim women go around in coverings. And finally, the average Christian knows that Muslims don't eat pork. For whatever reason, this seems to be the one doctrine that every Muslim feels they need to shout from the rooftops: we don't eat pork because we're not disgusting and kafirs like you who eat dirty, disgusting animals like pigs. So congratulations, Muslims. That gets through. You don't eat pork. Anything you want to add, Lloyd?
No, actually, this is fascinating. I mean, we've been discussing Islam for years. I mean, we've been talking about the subject, but you and I had very different views in the beginning, and I believe you disagreed with my views. However, what I found really gratifying was that you listened to me. You were willing to allow me to speak. You were willing to look at the evidence, and you were willing to think about it. You didn't agree at first. You didn't agree immediately, but you gave it time. You allowed me a platform. You didn't say that I was crazy. You said that's certainly unusual. That's peculiar. And yet, a year or two later, 2 years later, let's say, or you'll tell me the timetable, but you've now come to accept what I have to say, and yet you're not adding your own unique perspective to that. You're building upon that, and you've gone in your own direction as well, complementary, but still your own. So yeah, this is really interesting, and your insights are your analytical thinking is fantastic. I mean, so yeah, the treatment you give it is more articulate in many ways than mine.
Yes, well, thank you. We're going to hear a lot about my journey today, and we'll definitely get to meeting Lloyd, because that's a crucial step in my understanding of Islam. You know, there's a lot of apologists, well, maybe not a lot, but there are a fair number of Christians who are talking about Islam, and I think that a lot of them, unfortunately, are still approaching it with kind of the same mindset that I began with, that Islam is similar to Christianity in the fundamentals, that Muslims kind of respect the same ideas, that they've used scripture as foundational, that they're looking for truth as we understand it. We're looking for what they call true, but not in the same manner that we define truth.
Right.
So this is what the average Christian knows. I did know a bit more about Islam when I started to look into it than the average Christian did. I had multiple secular world history classes, and as part of that, they covered Islam. I mean, it was probably only one lecture out of the whole year, so it's not like a massive amount of material, but it's still more material than the average Westerner or average Christian is introduced to. And in the secular world history classes, I learned that Muhammad was an orphan who grew up poor, and they said that after having visions, he started to preach a new religion. I think Muslims would not necessarily agree with that statement exactly, but that's what we're taught in secular world history. We learned that Muhammad was not very successful when he first got started, that he had great difficulty attracting followers. He was persecuted for many years, but eventually, after making a journey from Mecca to Medina, he began to attract a larger following. We learned, to the credit of these classes, we did learn that Islam was spread primarily through military conquest. Now, there are Muslims who would want to deny this, but it's actually just a basic fact. You know, you can accept the fact and take it as a point of pride, like some Muslims do, or you can kind of try to cover it up. But in reality, Islam spread through military conquest. And in these classes, I learned that Muhammad was the first head of the army, that he was directly responsible for organizing Islam this way, organizing it around military conquest.
Can I pause and show
My
something for a
teachers,
moment, if I may?
yep, sure.
This, guys, if you go to my archive, links should be in the description, my Google Drive archive. This is written by a Muslim, Ahmad Adil Kamal, so he's clearly not Jewish or a Christian missionary. The Periodic Golden History of Islamic Conquest, Atlas of the Islamic Conquest from the Caliphate of Abu Bakr to the Ottoman Caliphate, from Central Asia to Morocco, Spain, and Central Europe. This is an actual history written by a Muslim of the military conquests of Islam. So this is military conquest with maps, with dates, with the actual conquests. So this is hundreds of pages of discussion, attacks, warfare, warfare, warfare. So please take a moment to download this and have a look. So let's just go look at, there are numerous maps you'll see here, for instance. There are numerous maps detailing what happened, where it happened, when it happened, how the battle occurred. So yeah, Islam is the religion of warfare.
Absolutely. And to their credit, Muslims in Muslim majority countries often take this as a sign of pride, not as something to be ashamed of.
Yep.
And they view Western Muslims who are ashamed of this kind of thing as being inferior, weaklings, that kind of thing.
Sourface Hussein is here. He says, you two are obsessed with Islam. Well, he's obsessed with Christianity. He's obsessed with the Trinity. And Sourface, why is it that you are terrified of meeting with me live just to read what is in the fiqh manuals, the Islamic sacred law manuals, just to read them and you can comment? So I'm happy to read through the Islamic law, which you clearly state is superior, is perfect, is Allah's law for the world that you want to impose upon the world. Meet me live. I will simply read them. You can read them with me. We will share the books. And you can simply comment as we read through the laws. Why is it you are so terrified of doing this? Please explain.
Yeah, Safra seems to be an expert at psychological projection. He comes in here and he thinks he's saying stuff about us, but he's really saying stuff about himself. And let me correct you, Safras. I am not obsessed with Islam. I am obsessed with saving Muslims from their horrible, evil, demonic cult that they follow. Just to be clear. I'm not obsessed with the religion. I'm obsessed with helping Muslims. Continuing along here, in these classes, we learned that the primary reason that Muhammad and his armies were successful wasn't because of any superior military strategy or great help from God or anything along the line. It was quite simple. Rome and Persia had been ignoring Arabia for hundreds of years. They had severely weakened each other through constant war and ignored Arabia. So there was this huge cache of viable soldiers, huge cache of military apparatus, and they were able to destroy the Roman and Persians because they were weak. Had nothing to do with anything other than some good timing. Also learned in these classes that historians generally believe that Muhammad probably heard Bible stories as a child and that he had misremembered them, that he had remembered some of the details but confused a lot of things. And then later on in life, he had some sort of experience where he began to recall these memories that he only vaguely had and started passing them off as his personal revelation. You know, they didn't say whether he was doing this fraudulently or that he actually thought that he was receiving revelation, but they did say that probably the real basis of his revelation was stories that he had heard earlier in life and only half remembered. These classes did offer an apologetic for the covering of women. I don't know why they flagged that particular issue. You know, they didn't offer apologetic for anything else, but they did make a point of saying that the covering of women was originally intended to increase women's rights, that it was done to prevent women from being treated as sexual objects, and that's certainly something that I continued to believe up until the time I started to really study Islam. Anything you'd like to add, Lloyd?
Not really. I don't want to dwell off topic too much, but yeah, this is the very basic, the most narrow of narratives that is told about Islam, and I believe it's one that Muslim apologists have foisted upon us so that we don't look beyond this, so that we accept this. It's a very nice, neat, pat story, so that we don't investigate deeper. It has the effect of being what I would call a thought-terminating cliche. So it's like a little Pavlovian response. You say the word jihad and they say jihad means peace or jihad means struggle. It's a thought terminate. You stop thinking at that point and you go, ah. It's like, you know, getting a shot of a drug and you just go, oh, that's sweet. And then you stop looking further. Yeah, I want to mention something. So let me share my, Muslims say, okay, Muslims are obsessed with Christianity. Briefly, two things. The unsheathed sword against the one who insults the messenger, not Allah, but if you unsheath your sword against the one who insults Mo himself. Let's have a look here. I'm not going to go into the book, but I'm going to show you, this is the definitive Islamic law manual, the Sharia manual, to define the law, the ruling on what happens when you insult Muhammad, right? Notice, chapter 1, whoever insults Muhammad is to be killed, whether they are a Muslim or a non-Muslim, a disbeliever. Chapter 2, Killing is prescribed on him, the one who insults the Prophet. It is not permissible to imprison or show favor to him or to ransom him. And any Muslim or non-Muslim who insults the Prophet is to be killed, and no repentance is sought from him. And then I'm going to skip over a bunch of stuff because the book just goes on. This is the view of the scholars. Whoever insults Muhammad is to be killed. And this bit in red, the scholars have consensus. Whoever insults the messenger, that's Muhammad, attributing a defect to him, such a person is a disbeliever. So Muhammad in Islamic law is utterly perfect. Utterly perfect. Continue, Thaddeus. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. You know, that's not something that we were taught in secular world history classes. We weren't taught that Muhammad was a perfect human being or anything along those lines, but we certainly weren't taught the opposite either. I have been interested in Christian apologetics for more than 20 years, and because of this, I also had a third source of knowledge about Islam. So I'm approaching Islam with secular knowledge, pop culture knowledge, and knowledge that I heard in Christian apologetics classes. Now, to be clear, I never had any class or watched any videos or anything that was specifically about Islam. But what I did have is things that provided overviews of world religions, provided some basic arguments of why these things were not, why these other religions weren't true, how to talk to people in those religions, that kind of thing. But this isn't something that a normal Christian would, the average Christian in the pew would ever hear. In these apologetics classes, I learned that portions of Islam were definitely copied from Christianity and Judaism, that Muhammad had taken things that the previous tradition believed and kind of passed them off as his own revelation. I did learn that the Quran claims that the Trinity consists of the Father, Jesus, and Mary, and this was offered as definitive proof that the Quran could not be the word of God. And that argument holds up to scrutiny. If this is supposedly the literal speech of God, then he should at least know what Christians believe. And he apparently did not. Since the God of Islam, since the author of the Quran, never criticizes actual Christian belief. He only criticizes this fake, made-up Trinity that no one ever believed in according to actual history. There might have been someone somewhere who believed this, but it was certainly never a significant position, not significant enough to register on world history.
Muslims do sometimes claim that we worship three gods. We are polytheists, and this belief, I believe, historically is rooted in the teaching of, I think it's an historian called John Philoponus. He had a heretical view that the Godhead was three separate gods acting together. So this is John Philoponus, and this belief was present and did at some point take root and flourished for a while in Arabia. So this would seem to be the source of that belief.
Yes, the Quran seems to think that Christians believe in tritheism, but then it doesn't even get the names of the three deities correct. So not only does it criticize a minority position, it doesn't even get that position correct. I learned that the most common evidence cited by Muslims in favor of their religion was so-called scientific foreknowledge or scientific miracles in the Quran. Claims that there was advanced scientific knowledge in their text, which proves it has to have come from a divine author, because no human being at the time could have known these things. And the primary example of this, the most popular example, being embryology. Of course, I also learned that these claims don't hold up to the slightest bit of scrutiny, that everything found in the Quran is either flat out wrong or it was common knowledge of the day, something that any educated person could come across and something that any person could reasonably observe if they sat down and carefully thought about the nature of reality.
Right.
I learned that the Quran was said to have been written in fragments, that Muhammad would have a revelation and people would just grab whatever was conveniently available, a leaf or a stick or a rock or whatever, and write it down on what was available. And that it wasn't until years after Muhammad had died that the Quran was compiled together by Uthman. That's not exactly correct according to Islamic tradition, but that Uthman had gathered it and that he had burnt all the manuscripts, that he had made a new authoritative canonical version of the Quran and burnt all the manuscripts that had existed prior to that, which makes the textual history of the Quran suspect because it's all going through one person. You're not really believing the Quran as given by Muhammad, you're believing the Quran as decided by Uthman. So that was definitely a criticism that was pointed out to me. And finally, these classes did talk about how Islamic scriptures contain justifications for violence. They did say that most Muslims don't follow these teachings, and that's true to a fairly decent extent. But they pointed out that even if just 1% of Muslims take these seriously, they try to put their God's commands into action, that's an awful lot of potential terrorists. So Islam is a real threat to our physical security in addition to being a threat religiously. So these are kind of the things that I heard from Christians who are criticizing Islam, while also criticizing, other religions, not people focused on Islam specifically, but just people who had some basic knowledge of a variety of world religions. And I think everything on this list is good criticism. Everything holds up to scrutiny. But you may notice that something is missing here. There are no moral critiques of Islam. There's nothing about Muhammad's reprehensible behavior. There's nothing about the utter ridiculous moral commands of the Quran other than teaching
don't
violence.
Forget, in Islamic law, with the Sharia developed between the 9th and the 14th centuries, it is illegal for a Muslim to criticize Islam. It is illegal for a Muslim to claim that Muhammad is anything less than perfect. It is not only illegal, which incurs the death penalty, as we showed, it is also slander, and it is backbiting. So there are multiple of these different laws that work against Muslims who would think otherwise, and this is not allowed. Can I make one more digression? Do you mind?
Yes.
Muslims have been obsessed with Christianity since the beginning, and this is from the first or second, I'm not sure if it's the most popular or the second most popular Islamic polemic against Christianity. This is written by Ibn Qayyim, and this is in his book. I will just show this here. The Guidance to the Uncertain in Replying to the Jews and the Nazarenes. Notice it doesn't say Christians, the Jews and the Nazarenes. And I'm going to go through just two short sections here. This is known to Muslims, and you will have seen this in the YouTube comment section mentioned by Muslims or similar arguments. Notice this is the 10th century, more or less, or something like, or the 14th century. So it's 700 years old or something, and you'll still see these arguments today. The prayer of the supposed Christians, the Nazarenes, ridicules God. Christians chose a way of prayer during which the most devoted of them would consider it no great matter if he happens to pass urine dripping on his thighs and legs. This is in church, right? So Christians would have no problem literally urinating on themselves in church. So then he would open a conversation with whomever happens to be sitting next to him. The chat would be about matters like the price of wine or pork. Pigs again. Who won in gambling, what dish he prepared at home, and the like. And then he would interrupt his prayer to talk about other things, and then the Christian would urinate in his seat if he can. This is the second or the first most popular Islamic polemic book in the world, right? Notice they speak here about Jesus. They say that we have a false belief about Jesus because we believe that God entered the vagina of a woman who eats, who drinks, who urinates, evacuates her bowels, and menstruates. Then he got attached to the inside of her abdomen, wobbling between excrement, urine, and menstrual blood. We can't say a bad word about Muhammad, but look what they will say about Jesus.
Yeah, and whether Muslims read this particular work or not, and I'm sure many do, they absorb these kind of ideas. These are the kind of ideas that are considered normal opinions of Christianity in the Islamic world. Mm-hmm. That they teach the inferiority of Christians. They teach the disgusting nature of Christians, and they teach these ridiculous lies about how Christians behave.
Yeah, No, this is sad.
So,
And it's the permissible
so at
slander.
this, exactly. Yeah. I mean, the people who wrote these things, they probably knew they were lies, but it's okay if it benefits Islam. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
So at this point, just so I'm now getting to where I'm about to start studying Islam. And this is basically where I stood on Islam. I thought that Islam is obviously false, but it's not particularly better or worse than any other false religion. That all religions are false. They all have, other than, sorry, all religions other than Christianity are false. They all have their own strengths and weaknesses. They all try to have good moral teachings. And, you know, there's not really an obvious like ranking or anything. They're all just wrong. They're not morally superior or inferior, and they're not intellectually inferior or superior to one another. I believe that Islam had its origins in confused or plagiarized Jewish and Christian ideas. And I put plagiarized in quotes there. I mean, we throw this term around, but it's not really an accurate term. The idea of plagiarism is a modern idea. So there's not necessarily a moral problem with Muhammad or the founder of Islam copying ideas and passing them off as his own. The problem is an intellectual one. Islam claims that it's the first and original religion. It claims that its scripture is the literal speech of God. It claims that Muhammad had direct revelations from God, and so on and so forth. So it's not necessarily an ethical problem of copying ideas, but there is a very clear intellectual problem here, that this can't really be the original religion if it's copying other things, and it certainly can't be the literal speech of God if it's copying the speech of human beings.
Right.
I was firmly in the opinion that Islam spread primarily through military conquest. I was under no illusion that Islam was, had spread because of its great religious message or anything like that. I believe that Muslims had similar moral teachings as Christians do, different, but similar in that many were directly the same, that they had, the same ideas, and that ones that were different were just a difference of opinion, that they weren't like fundamentally different, that they didn't have a different basis for their beliefs, which I now know is the case. I did acknowledge that some zealots act crazy from time to time, and Islam has a history of violence. But I thought that the average Muslim, followed moral precepts that are similar to what Christians do. And I'll say that that's still true. That most Muslims are much, 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 much better than the religion that they claim to follow, because they don't actually follow the depraved teachings of their prophet and God. I believed that the Quran was roughly equivalent to the Bible in function, not in truth, of course, but in function, that it served as the primary basis of Islam, that Islamic beliefs were derived from the Quran and basically the Quran alone. That, people debated the meaning of things, of course, but that ultimately any justification went back to the Quran. I didn't have any knowledge of any other sources of knowledge, any other sources of scripture for Muslims. And finally, I believed that the mandatory head coverings, and especially the prohibitions on drawing Muhammad, were probably later misunderstandings. That this isn't what early Muslims believed, that these things had been added to Islam over time, and people's zealotry for enforcing these things was really misplaced, because it wasn't even really something that was originally part of their religion.
Well, two things I might
Anything
add.
you'd like to add?
Oh, you read my mind. Yeah, so the Hadith were at one point in history not considered canonical. They were not considered sources of legislation, sources of law in Islam. This was a change foisted upon the Islamic world during the development of the Sharia, especially by Imam Shafi. And also, when you mention that Islam and morality, Christianity has, look, Judaism had the civil law, the legal system we have in courts, right? That's the civil law. Then you have the ceremonial law, and you have the moral law, right? Like the Ten Commandments is a set of moral laws. But of course, like thou shalt not murder, for instance, that eventually becomes civil law, right? Christianity only, for the New Testament, imposes a moral law, and hopefully our legal system is derived and built upon that moral law. But Christianity does not legislate civil law. Islam does not have a moral system. It doesn't have right and wrong. It has legal and illegal, halal and haram. It does not have a moral system. It has a legal system. It has what is legal and what is illegal, and it has loopholes and exceptions, and what is illegal can be made legal. And sometimes those exceptions are so broad or so universal that they effectively overwhelm the legal and make the illegal a permanent state of lawful.
Yeah, definitely. That's we're going to see in a couple of slides that there were some things that I had a really hard time grasping as I'm diving into Islam, and that's definitely one of them. And Islam is not really based on what we would consider moral precepts, and it's based on legal definitions. It's all about rules, not moral principles. And some people might be asking, what's the difference? If a Muslim sees this, they especially might ask, what's the difference? Well, the difference is a moral precept gives you guidance, and it's right or wrong regardless of the circumstances. It doesn't matter if there's a secular law against it. It doesn't matter if there's any punishment tied to it. It's still wrong. Whereas a law is very specific. It's not a broad principle. It's very specific. It tells you exactly what to do or what you can't do in a specific situation. And because of that, if you're in a slightly different situation than what the law is written for, you are not necessarily obligated to follow that law.
Yeah, that's a topic on Al Fadi's channel. I will be discussing this in depth. I'll be going through this. So it's from July. I expect that series to drop. So I'll be going through this and introducing each of these laws with examples and walking you through it as a course. These will be bite-sized videos, like 10 to 12 minutes long each. So there'll be something you can watch over and over quickly and absorb, and I'll explain all of these little nuances.
Absolutely. Definitely looking forward to seeing that series. So about 4 years ago, things started to change for me. I started to become interested in learning more about Islam. I was watching a Christian apologetics video. I don't know the exact subject, but it certainly had nothing to do with Islam. It was just a video about some specific argument for Christianity or answering some specific objection, whatever the case. And someone had left a comment on that saying that they loved that channel and that they also loved Acts 17 Apologetics. So those are the two best channels on YouTube. So I took their advice. I went over to Acts 17, and David has his testimony video pinned as the first thing on his homepage. So I watched that video, and I was hooked. Even all these years later, having watched hundreds of thousands of videos, I'd still say that that's probably one of the best videos ever produced on all of YouTube, David's testimony. And because I was interested in him as a person, the video, it says nothing about Islam. It's not part of his personal journey to Christ. But because I was interested in him and, interested because of his testimony, I started to watch his material. And of course, most of his material is about Islam. And I started to see all kinds of things that I had never heard in my entire life. And this is as someone who is interested in intellectual arguments, interested in studying Christianity. If I had never heard these things, you can guarantee the average believer has never heard them. And most people watching this channel are very familiar with Islam. May be familiar with the kind of things that I was learning, but they may have forgotten how they didn't know any of these things before they got interested in Islam. For whatever reason, they got interested to it. That these aren't things that most people are familiar with. And so I quickly realized that Islam, like Christianity, is based on history, that it makes specific claims about specific historical persons doing specific historical events at specific times. And because of this, it's subject to objective evidence. It's subject to real scrutiny. This is actually quite unusual. It is unusual for a religion to make claims about history. Most religions have a mythical history. And I don't mean that it's false. I don't mean the popular definition of mystery. I mean the technical sense, that it's written as a history, but it's not intended to be read as literal history. It's meant to provide a moral tale for the foundation of the earth or whatever it's talking about. It's not meant to be saying this is literally how things came about. And because most religions don't make a lot of objective claims about reality, you can't really prove them false. Now, you can't prove them true either. You just can't prove them false. Now, you can argue against them in various ways. They do make some claims, but they don't have the ability to be scrutinized the way Christianity does. Christianity is based on a historical event. It's based on the death and resurrection of Jesus. If that didn't take place, Christianity is false. Simple. And that it's as simple as that.
And
it
Islam,
doesn't matter
of course,
anything
does claim
else.
that never happened.
Yes, of course Islam claims that. And we'll get into why they claim that in a little bit. But Islam likewise makes claims about history that are foundational to the religion. If Muhammad did not receive revelation from God, if he was not a prophet of God, if he did not bring the Quran, then Islam is false, period. So because of this, and my interest in history in general, I was really drawn to studying Islam. At some point, YouTube recommended a video by Islam Critiqued, and I eventually ended up striking a conversation with him and becoming friends. This was before David had promoted him. So his channel was very small at the time, maybe around 2,000 subscribers. It was easy to get a hold of him. You certainly can't do that today. You can't just send an email and strike up a conversation with Islam Critique. But at that time, he was pretty small, just getting started. And I was able to get in touch with him. I ended up befriending him. So anything you'd like to add, Lloyd?
No, nothing at the moment. I mean, I'll interject here and there. But yeah, interesting to hear your story. We actually haven't discussed it in this depth in the past, so interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever given such a complete picture. I've certainly talked about these things from time to time, but probably a lot briefer. I probably never gave a complete picture of where I was coming from or how I got into Islam or anything like that. So before we continue my story, I wanted to ask this question: why should Christians care about Islam? I just said that I was interested in it because it's based in history. It was which played into my own personal interest. But why should Christians in general care about Islam? Well, the reason Christians should care about Islam is the same reason they should care about all of their fellow human beings, that Christians are called to spread the gospel. This isn't a special calling to preachers or evangelists or anything. The Great Commission is a call to everyone. Everyone is called to be and make disciples for Christ. And there's an estimated 1.8 billion Muslims in the world. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people who need Christ. And this compares to around 200 million atheists. Now, you will see a higher number cited. People will say, there's a billion atheists or whatever. But those numbers aren't really genuine. They're based on lumping together a variety of different people with very different beliefs. They all fall under the category of irreligious in a sense, which is why they lump them together, but their beliefs are completely different. An atheist has a firm position that there is no God. An agnostic doesn't take a position at all. They say, I don't know. I'm kind of looking into things. I'm not sure what's true. And then in addition to this, people get lumped in who are theists. They believe in the existence of God or gods, but they don't practice a religion. Or maybe they even do practice spirituality, but they don't adhere to a particular religion. And because they don't adhere to a particular religion, they're lumped into the none category. And when you lump those together with atheists, that's really disingenuous because it's not really showing a correct understanding of where people stand on their religion. So there's 200 million atheists, 1.8 billion Muslims. Yet almost all Christian apologetics is aimed at atheist arguments. That it's aimed at refuting arguments against the existence of God. It's aimed at refuting arguments that undermine the historical basis of Christianity. And it's aimed at providing a positive case for belief in Christianity, providing reasons why Christians should believe that Christianity is the truth.
Yeah.
In addition
may I add
to
something that
go ahead.
is just a diversion, or do you want to finish and then I'll come back in?
No, go ahead. Go ahead. That's a good spot.
Yeah. So let's have a quick talk about these 1.6 billion Muslims. So this is the true Muslim game. The Sunni say Shia are not true Muslims. Shia, Sunni are not true Muslims. Sunni and Shia, the Ahmadi, are not true Muslims. The Salafist, every Muslim should be a jihadi. Sunni jihadis, Shia jihadi are not true jihadi. Shia jihadi, Sunni jihadi are not true jihadi. Moderate Muslims, jihadis are not true Muslims. Jihadis, moderate Muslims are not true Muslims. Conclusion, no Muslim is a true Muslim. No Muslim represents true Islam, and all Muslims think they are the true Muslims while all the others are not. What exactly is a true Muslim and a true Islam? Nobody knows. But when you say something negative, then it's like, how dare you criticize the faith of 1.6 billion Muslims? Like, yeah, just thought I'd raise that. So like, there's 1.6 billion of you. When I showed some stuff about the Pakistani court system using Sharia laws, a Muslim apologist actually told me Pakistanis are not true Muslims. Okay, fine.
I mean, from my perspective, Afghanistan and Pakistan are like the two countries that are not falling into the category of Muslims leaving Islam in large numbers. So if they are true Muslims, then I guess all countries where there's true Muslims are having apostasy problems. So continuing on here, in addition to the numbers argument, and there's also the fact that the vast majority of Muslims are indeed very nice people, and they're religiously inclined. So they're people whose personalities and religious views and outlook on life are very compatible with Christianity. But because they deny the core doctrines of the church, they, like all non-believers, are going straight to hell. Works do not lead to salvation. Only placing one's faith in the completed work of Jesus on the cross leads to salvation. So there's all these Muslims that are wonderful people, but they're trapped in this horrible religious system. They are victims of their religion. So this should motivate Christians to really want to reach out to Muslims. When an atheist calls a Christian's names and says you're stupid and whatnot, it's great if Christians have compassion on them and see that what they are doing is motivated by evil forces. But how much easier it is to have compassion on a Muslim who's clearly trapped by their religious system, as opposed to being trapped by their own sense of superiority, their own sense of wanting to feel intellectually superior to all Christians. So Muslims are trapped in their religion, they're victims of their religion, but Muslim women are especially victims of their religion. Muslims deal with feelings of inferiority. They lack love. They have a decreased sense of worth or no worth because of the nature of their God. Their God is not loving. Their God does not care about them. Their God views them as merely slaves. That is the highest thing a Muslim person can aspire to, is being a faithful slave of Allah, serving him well, providing him with whatever he apparently needs from them. In addition to that, Muslims who really understand their religion understand that their God is quite arbitrary, that he just randomly decides who he wants to save, who he wants to make a Muslim, and who he wants to make a non-Muslim. And he'll make people non-Muslims, and then he'll punish them for being non-Muslims. And he'll make people Muslims, and then he'll reward them for being Muslims regardless of their actions. So it's a pretty hopeless situation. I mean, you hope that you are in Allah's favor, but you can never know. And you have no sense of worth, because ultimately all you are is a slave. If you serve Allah well and you're a man, you're going to have some carnal pleasure in Jannah. If you serve Allah well and you're a woman, well, congratulations, you get to avoid hellfire. And that's about all you get for being a Muslim woman, is you get to avoid hellfire. So Muslims are trapped in a situation where they view themselves, where they're far more fearing Allah's punishment than they are wanting his reward, and they certainly aren't wanting a relationship with him. Christianity offers a relationship with the true God. So because Muslims are such victims of their religion, I just have so much compassion, so much desire to help people who've been victimized by their religion. Final reason why Christians should care about Islam is that secular culture acts like all religions are kind of the same thing, but it especially acts like Christianity and Islam are basically the same thing. It's just a slightly different version of the same religion. And because of this secular attitude, if people don't actually study Islam or other world religions, they don't really have much motivation for evangelism. They kind of think that everything's the same, and everyone's just looking at religion from a different perspective, that good people in any religious system are going to achieve salvation. And that's utter nonsense. It's utter nonsense. When you actually look at religions without a superficial lens that these comparative religion classes apply to it, you see that religions are actually fundamentally different. They have some similarities, some things in common, but the things they have in common tend to be trivial, and the things that they disagree on tend to be central.
Right.
So those are my reasons for caring about Islam, and why I think other people should care about Islam as well.
Just pause
Any
one
reasons
moment.
you'd like to add, Bud?
Learning is key. Welcome to the channel. He says that the sound is playing up, it keeps cutting out. Unfortunately, this happens to a percentage of my audience. It happens on every live stream. This seems to be a YouTube problem. I have a very high speed internet connection, so I am pumping out the data as fast as it can go. I have nearly a gigabit, and I've got a very fast upload, and I'm using very little of that. So YouTube always has this choppy audio. It always messes with my audio. It's something I've never been able to solve. So as far as I know, this is a YouTube problem. Not everyone's affected, but it goes away usually after 12 to 24 hours. So I do apologize, but there's nothing that I can do about it.
Yeah, a couple other people in chat just said that it's fine, and that's what you're getting at. That's only a few people that get messed up. It's very bizarre. It never happens on my channel.
It's consistent with mine. It's consistent. I get this from some people. It's random. It's always a handful, but yeah.
So is there anything you want to add about
just
why
want to show something you
kind of,
it's kind of slightly related to, but we mentioned earlier Muhammad is treated as a god, right? And there was a couple of things you said that just made me think of this particular passage. This is within the Islamic law, okay? And this is the true position of Muhammad within Islam. And look at the parallels with the Gospel of James here, Thaddeus. You'll probably pick this up. This is ruling P75.2 in the Reliance, the world's most popular Islamic law manual, most common Islamic law manual. Not loving the Prophet more than all people. So Muhammad, a Muslim must love. To be a Muslim, you must love Muhammad more than anything else in your life, literally. So the Prophet said, none of you believes, you are not a Muslim, until I, Muhammad, not Allah, until Muhammad is more beloved to you than your wife, your child, and when they say self, they mean your life. In other words, you must be willing to die for Muhammad and all people. In other words, you cannot be a Muslim until Muhammad is the single, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and all thy soul and all thy strength. Would I be correct in making that assertion?
Indeed.
This is the Islamic law. Praise be to Allah.
Yeah, from an outsider perspective, it sure looks like Muhammad is the primary god of Islam, that Allah is a afterthought.
Yeah, and if we also saw the death penalty for insulting Muhammad. It's not the death penalty for insulting Allah. That is optional. Certainly they can, and they do mention it. But the title states you have the death penalty for insulting Momo, not Allah.
Yeah, definitely. So this is just one of the examples of how fundamentally different these religions actually are. That Christianity, sometimes Muslims, ironically, or maybe because they're projecting, come to us and say, you're deifying a man. And I'm like, Jesus is a God, according to Christianity. He is God incarnate. You, however, are treating Muhammad the same way you're accusing us of treating Jesus, and you have no problem with that. Just crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So continuing with my story then. So as I began to look into Islam, as I began to research it, watching YouTube videos, reading primary sources, investigating Muslim responses to accusations, and so forth, there were some things that I definitely learned quickly that I didn't know before I started studying Islam, but which I learned quickly and were not that difficult to accept. I learned that Islam is not based on the Quran alone, that it's based on the Hadith, which are the sayings of Muhammad, as well as the seerah, which are the biographies of Muhammad.
The
That it has
Gospels.
kind of these three
The
sources.
Gospels, because you can call the New Testament the Gospels of, the biographies of Jesus. That's a euphemism.
Yes, the seerah are like the Gospels, and Muslims will try to use this sometimes. They'll be like, so when they ask Christians for where their scripture is, and they point to the Gospels, they'll say, no, I'm not talking about the Gospels. I'm talking about the book that was given to Jesus, because this is how things work. Allah gives a book to his prophets, and then secondary sources come along. The Gospels being the equivalent of the seerah, and those are good, but we need to also see the book that Jesus was given, and because they're approaching this from a completely different mindset, they don't really understand that. They don't understand the irony here, because they'll say the Gospels were written 30 to 60 years after Jesus, or sometimes they'll say 100 years because they don't understand how a calendar works. But they'll say that they were written in the first century, and we want things that are written during Jesus's life. They're given directly to Jesus, and they don't realize the irony here, because the Hadith and seerah, at minimum, are written 200 years after the time of Muhammad. And a lot of the sources that are followed are written much, much later than that, even. And Muslims, again, they project this problem onto Christianity by saying 30 years after the death of Jesus, it's too late to write a gospel, while believing sources written more than 200 years after Muhammad died. 200 years isn't necessarily too long. I want to be clear here. But it's a lot longer than 30 years. There's a lot more time for corruption, changing things, and so on in 200 years than in 30.
Yeah, and Denatrius of Astora says they don't have a single Quran from the 6th century. And in fact, I think the first complete Quran probably dates from, the 9th or 10th century. So they don't actually have a complete script. And we know they've got multiples of these Qurans.
Yeah, I mean, I assume he meant the 7th century, because of course there wouldn't be one from the 6th century. But yes, and what you said is correct. At one point I tried to look into when the first complete Quran was, and I actually couldn't find a definitive answer. All I found is claim after claim of this being a mostly complete Quran, this being a mostly complete Quran, and
51%
I think it's actually
is
like
mostly complete.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. There are Qurans from before the 10th century, 8th, 9th century that are 97%, 98%, 99% complete even. But as near as I could tell, the first actually completely complete Quran is like from the 12th century,
Oh, wow.
which isn't necessarily important, except that Muslims always claim that the first complete Bible isn't until the 3rd century AD or 4th century AD, which is correct. But if that's your standard, then the Quran wasn't written until the 12th century.
And not a single Uthmanic Quran
600
survives.
years.
There's not a single
Yes.
Uthmanic Quran.
Correct. Yes. And, Uthman supposedly made the copies of his new canonical Quran and sent them to every corner of the Muslim world, and none of those have survived.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's not necessarily like super surprising that none of them have survived.
Well, actually, no, it is super surprising, because if you look at the Christians had no political power for hundreds of years. They therefore also had no wealth. Remember, they were lion food for the Romans, right? Whereas if you look at the Islamic conquest, that made Islam a very wealthy, very widespread empire with access to resources. So instead of writing on parchment, which would instead of writing on papyrus, which would rot within a given period, which was very flammable, easily destroyed, the Muslims were writing, in theory, on vellum, on animal hide, which lasts for thousands of years. So they actually had access to writing materials which the Christians did not, and yet they have none of the originals, which is a very interesting situation, very convenient situation in some ways.
Yeah, and the audience, contribute a little bit more to this canonization of the Quran. Bob Fisher pointed out that the Hafs wasn't really canonized till 1924. Now, my understanding is it's kind of a de facto standard before that, but only because of coincidence. It happened to be the first version printed on the printing press, which made it the most widespread. So it's kind of a de facto standard before then.
But they
But then
dumped a
on the
bunch
other
of
hand,
Qurans in the river, in the Nile. Now, of course, if you do something like that, there'll be a riot and people will die. But yet the Muslims dumped thousands of Qurans in the Nile. Now, I thought the Quran was perfect. Did they have an issue with those Qurans?
well, that is one of the three proper ways to dispose of a Quran is to immerse it in water. The idea being that the ink will come off, being from the days when people wrote with pens, and the water will take the ink off, and then it'll just be a book because the words of the Quran will be gone. But obviously, it doesn't actually work in a book printed on a modern printing press. The being in water isn't going to remove the words, so it's actually just a really, what appears to be a really disrespectful way to dispose of the Quran, but it's supposedly one of the correct ways.
Yeah.
But yeah, if a Christian were to throw a Quran in a lake, there might be a riot. There might be people coming to try to exterminate them.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, Villainous pointed out that there are parts of the Quran that do come from the 5th and 6th century, before the time of Muhammad, and manuscripts. And that's because parts of the Quran were copied from existing manuscripts of other documents. So when was the Quran really canonized? I don't know. I don't actually think that the story of Uthman doing it is true. I think that is an invented story that was invented to try to explain why people were finding different versions of the Quran, that they go to someone and they would have a different version of it. Like, oh, yes, that's because Muhammad gave it in 7 different versions. And then Uthman gathered up all the heirs and he made the canonical one. And I think it's just a made-up story.
If I can add something to that, a couple of parallels with the development of the Islamic law, the Sharia and the fiqh. The original sources of the Islamic law have all been erased. They're all gone. And this is known to the scholars of the genre of the Islamic law, that the original early sources that they derived them from are all erased. They're missing. So, and the implication, they might not state it outright, but the implication is very clear. It was deliberately removed so that the original sources they plagiarized from, if you will, cannot be found, so that they cannot trace the plagiarism, so that it looks unique. And if I may, one more thing, just off topic, but just something the audience might find interesting. The term harf, the plural in Arabic is huruf or ahruf, right? Now, we know that they speak of the versions of the Quran, the variants, right? So let's have a look at Arabic words can have multiple meanings, and this is from the Islamic science, the ilm, right? Letter of the alphabet, ahruf, letter of the alphabet. It can also mean word, this is correct. It can also mean a Quranic reading. It can also mean dialect. This is taken from the Encyclopaedia of Islam, right? Volume 13, links in the description to my Google archive. But notice here, the ilm al-huruf, the science of the ahruf, if you will, right? Onomatomancy, which is a magical practice. It is based on the occult properties of the letters of the alphabet and of the divine and angelic names which they form. Now, I want you to note there are something like a dozen different variations and definitions of ahruf. Within dictionaries, you should put your major definition first. This one is buried at the bottom for some odd reason, because when you go into the encyclopedias and you look at the definitions, the longer discussion on these variations here, they're pretty short. This one is very lengthy. They describe the Quran as an occult book, which the scholars read very differently to the way lay Muslims read it. But ahruf means a magical practice based on the occult, ritual magic. And this is one of the reasons they say, well, ahruf is a mystery, because they don't want you looking into this aspect of Islam. The occult, ritual magic, is deeply embedded in Islam, but it's something that has not been investigated by, because obviously it sounds like talking about Bigfoot and Alex Jones. Yeah, I'll move on.
Yes. So a couple of people have pointed out various other problems with the textual history of the Quran and how There are now theories that it derives from a Syriac text and so forth. But at this point in my journey, I hadn't learned anything like that for sure. But continuing on with what I had learned, that Islamic scriptures really do teach violence as a final marching order. I did come in believing that violence was a significant part of Islamic history, that it was important to the religion. But I did confirm that. I did learn more about why this is and how it wasn't necessarily always the case that the earliest texts attributed to Muhammad are more peaceful and that it got more violent over time. I also learned that Muhammad was a morally depraved man. As I pointed out before, despite knowing several intellectual problems with Islam, I had never heard any real moral argument against Muhammad other than spreading Islam by violence. I learned that Muhammad had numerous special privileges in addition to doing things that a normal person would consider quite immoral. I learned that he robbed caravans, that he had more than 4 wives, despite that being the limit his God places for all other human beings. He alone is exempt from that 4 wives rule. I learned that he broke his oaths, that he had people executed for criticizing him, that he tortured a man for money, and of course that he married and bedded a young girl in his blessed marriage to Aisha. And I think there's probably like 2 reasons why I never heard much of this material before. One is that Muslims do a very good job of not letting this information get into the pop culture, into the public sphere. But the other reason that I never really heard this is because of this fundamental difference between how Muslims view things and how Christians view things. Christians would look at Muhammad doing immoral things, and they might say that casts some doubt on him as a prophet, that raises some red flags, but they wouldn't say that it's necessarily a good argument against him, because prophets are human beings. They make mistakes. They do immoral things from time to time. Yeah. And furthermore, the truth of an argument in logic that underlies Western society, inherited from Christianity, is that attacking a person is an invalid way to argue. You argue against a person's ideas, not against the person themselves. So by arguing that Muhammad's an immoral person, you're not actually arguing against his ideas, at least in our way of thinking. Now, Muslims have a very different opinion. They view one of the primary arguments against Christianity as the fact that the Bible is honest and depicts prophets as committing moral actions. And they view this as proof that Christianity is wrong, that prophets should be perfect. They shouldn't do anything immoral, and Christianity has made up lies about them.
Well, that was has corrupted the scriptures. A convenient change which the Muslims made, because obviously they had to try to rehabilitate Muhammad's image. If I can show something, you mentioned caravan robbing. This is the Hidayah. This is the jewel in the crown of the Hanafi school of fiqh. Right, this is the largest Islamic school of jurisprudence in the world. Notice this in this book 8. This is volume 2. There are 4 volumes. This is volume 2, book 8. They speak here in chapter 2 of thefts which occasion amputation. And then we can read about the manner of cutting off the limb of a thief. So if you all want to learn about that, there's dozens of pages explaining exactly what happens. But notice here, on Al-Sayr, or the Institutes, book 9, the manner of waging war. And then chapter 4 of that is of plunder and the division thereof, and of the manner of the division of plunder, and gratuities bestowed upon particular persons over and above their share of the plunder. Now, this is a religion, supposedly. We're told this is a religion. Plunder is something that pirates take. When the barbarian Northmen, the Vikings, were invading places, they took plunder. They raped women and took plunder. When pirates captured ships, took over ships, killed the crew, they took plunder. Why has Islam instituted within its legal system the law of Allah and the law of Muhammad plunder and the division of plunder? This is law applicable to piracy. But this is a religion, the religion of warm yellow peace.
Well, to answer your question, I know it's a rhetorical question, but the reason that this is in the Sharia is because Muhammad did it, and Muhammad's the perfect
It
example.
is legal. Therefore, it is legal.
Since Muhammad couldn't have done anything wrong, anything he did is not only legal, but it's exemplary. That it's an example that should be followed if people are taking Islam seriously. The final thing that I quickly learned about Islam is that the Quran and Muhammad made numerous idiotic scientific claims. That they make claims that no sane person would believe today, such as stars being objects that Allah throws at demons who are trying to sneak into heaven to hear his secret plans. This obviously being an explanation as to why there are so-called shooting stars, which actually have nothing to do with actual stars. And I also was introduced to the 1001 Inventions propaganda tour, and I had some good laughs at that, about Muslims trying to claim that Muslims had invented everything in the world, basically.
Right.
So we now come to the crucial step in my journey. Two crucial steps. One, launching a channel, and two, meeting Lloyd. So it started out that I'd been studying Islam for around a year now. I was having some conversations with Muslims in chat. I certainly didn't start doing that the first day I started learning about Islam. It was quite some time before I started, to feel I had a good enough handle to strike up a conversation with someone. So I was having some conversations with Muslims in text form, but I certainly had no plans to start giving public talks about Islam or even apologetics in general. This is just way out of my comfort zone of doing something like this. But I did mention to Islam Critique, who, as I said earlier, I had befriended, as a personal friend. It was a personal conversation. I mentioned to him that I was giving a talk at my church that was apologetics related. And he said something like, well, as long as you're giving the talk anyway, you might as well put it up on YouTube, and I'll even have you on my channel to interview you and give you started. So I was hesitant, but after some thoughts, some prayer, I decided, why not? Why not put it out there? What harm does it do? If no one ever watches it, no big deal. I haven't lost anything. And it's like Colin pointed out, I'm doing the talk anyway. I might as well go ahead and record it. I didn't actually record the live version. I re-gave it at home and recorded that. But still, the point being that I didn't do any additional research, any additional effort. I just recorded it, edited it, put it out. And I didn't really know what I was going to do with the channel. I thought I'd probably just do mostly Christian apologetics, maybe do a little polemics against Islam here and there. But I've been researching Christian apologetic arguments for more than 20 years. And at this point, I was only a year or so into my journey of studying Islam. So I certainly was no expert by any means. But I was also in conversation with a ex-Muslim who was considering, who noticed my thoughtful comments, and he's like, it's rare to get to talk to a Christian who actually wants to have a real conversation. So we ended up having a long, extended private conversation. And he encouraged me to do a video on the fastest growing religion meme. So I ended up doing a lot of research, figuring out what the real statistics are, and making a video on that. And it actually went somewhat viral. I only had maybe 50 or 100 subscribers at the time, and those basically came from my interview with Islam Critique. But someone who saw it posted the video on a popular Reddit forum for ex-Muslims. And suddenly, it starts to get a lot of views. Not necessarily a lot in the grand scheme of things, but a huge number for my channel at the time. With 50 subscribers, it's getting 500 views in a day or something, which is and I was picking up subscribers. And then Colin also posted it on his channel after a couple of days because he liked it so much. So between those two, I was off and running. I had gotten a start here, but I was still thinking I'd probably mostly talk about Christianity.
Yeah. Can we
little by little,
pause a moment? Would you mind, Thaddeus, just to address a couple of questions? Someone asked if Muhammad it really existed. I mean, this is contentious and is in the public eye right now, this question, at least within this community. I will state I will be discussing this on Al-Fadi next month, and hopefully with Jay, if I can get back to the script, to the presentation. But there is a historical precedent for what Muhammad is doing, which goes back to Yemen, to the first millennium BC. And then, surprisingly, when you look at the development of Islamic law, there is a very strong precedent within Greek history at a Greek heretic. And we'll discuss that another time, it's off topic, who seems to be a model. So this Yemeni historical precedent, as well as a particular Greek model, which Muhammad seems to be a composite of at least these two. And bear that in mind, I will discuss that in the future. And then someone said that INUS, Muhammad mistakenly misunderstood the Trinity. He thought it was three gods. That is actually derived from a heresy that was prevalent in Arabia in the 5th century. John Philoponus had a heresy called tritheism or tritheism, where he proposed as a heretic that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost were three separate divinities, three separate deities. So if you look at the Islamic literature, it is derived extensively from Gnostic heresies and from folktales, from Jewish and Christian folktales, and from heresies. So they've borrowed from pre-existing heresies. So that idea is taken from this John Philoponus. Continue, please, Thaddeus.
Excellent. So, I'm off to a good start on my new YouTube channel. I actually had set a goal of, I had no idea what to expect, but I work professionally as a data analyst. I'm very into numbers. So, I outlined some numbers, and I thought maybe I can get 1,000 subscribers in the first year, and that would be a really great start. Well, that ended up happening in less than 6 months. I think it was about 4 months, actually, that I got to 1,000 subscribers. And at this point, I'm still thinking I'll mostly talk about Christianity. Probably won't do a lot about Islam. It's not my wheelhouse. But, the Lord had other plans for me. He kept working on me, slowly working through people in my lives and convincing me that I needed to talk about Islam. And ultimately, I'm now completely convinced that this is my calling in life, is to do ministry to Muslims. Sometimes atheists will post on my channel, and I basically just have no interest in talking to them. I will. I always talk to everyone who posts, but because, at least to me, atheism is very boring. It's always the same thing. It's always, I reject your evidence, therefore you have no evidence, therefore God doesn't exist. And that's all the atheist argument ever boils down to. Muslims make really bad arguments, but they at least have a variety of arguments they make. They at least have a variety of things that they want to talk about. And frankly, any argument that's actually decent that comes from an atheist is probably going to be absorbed and repeated by Muslims anyway. So it's not like I'm not dealing with the atheist argument. I'm just dealing with them in a way that has more meaning to Muslims than directly addressing them. So about 9 months into my journey, Lloyd posted on my channel in the comment section for the first time. I was very impressed by his comments. I don't know the exact subject anymore, but let's just say that the subject was jihad. And a Muslim was trying to say that Islam doesn't teach violence. And then Lloyd would post verses of the Quran, and then the Muslim would try to say, oh, that doesn't mean that. It means blah, 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 blah. And then Lloyd would post a whole bunch of tafsirs from top Islamic scholars showing that his interpretation was wrong. He's like, well, Muhammad taught differently. And then he'd post all the hadith of what Muhammad taught. He just kept coming and coming and coming, and totally overwhelming this poor, pathetic attempt at dawah by the Muslim on my channel. So I was very impressed with the way he his knowledge, the way he handled things. And I asked him if he'd be interested in joining a live stream on my channel. At this time, Lloyd hadn't posted any material on Islam on his own channel. I didn't have any particular reason to believe that he was interested in, getting into YouTube. But I asked him because I was impressed with his work, and he agreed. He said that would be great. So we started to do a series that we called Islam's Apologetics, and looking at some of the claims of Islam and how they don't match up with actual Islamic texts. I think the first one we did was on Quran onlyism, Muslims who try to deny the Hadith, and showing how, according to all of Islamic history, all important scholars in Islam, rejecting the Hadith makes you not a Muslim. So that is kind of how Lloyd and I came to know each other. And this is going to prove to be transformational in my understanding of Islam. I was watching many Christian commentaries, many Christian critiques of Islam. And, each person has their own strengths and weaknesses, but in a way, they're kind of all on a similar page. I wasn't yet into the historical critique, so I would say definitely the historical critique is a different angle to come at things. But for the most part, everyone was saying kind of the same thing, that they're kind of just taking the historical narrative for granted. They're taking the moral narrative for granted. They were taking the foundational narrative for granted, that they were approaching Islam as if it was similar to Christianity in the way it operated. And because of everyone kind of approaching things from the same manner, when Lloyd started to say some different things, I was a little shocked. I'll just put it that way. Before I get into any details, anything you want to add, Lloyd?
Yeah, well, look, I fully understand. I appreciate the fact that you took the time to review what I had to say, to listen. Just the fact that you listened, then you actually reviewed what I had to say. It took you a while, but you started to say, look, you think there's some degree of, at least some merit here, that this is worth listening to, if not necessarily believing at first. And I'm getting the same stares from Jay sometimes now. So I need to bring him on board and change his view, because I know he doesn't believe the standard Islamic historical narrative, but I will state that the world is still very much steeped in the standard Islamic religious narrative, and that is completely false. And that needs to change. Yeah, can I just do a quick diversion, because this did come up.
Yep.
Someone mentioned it. Someone mentioned the name Isa. This is, you will find this information. There's a central site that collects this, and thanks to the donations I've received from people, I can subscribe and get the latest archaeological evidence. This is legitimate archaeological evidence, because I find that inscriptions, genuine archaeology, historical facts, really. Hi, Too Many Marys, welcome. Nicole Brown, welcome. Carol B, and so on. John Doe. Edkin, always welcome, thank you. So, yeah. The earliest evidence of Christianity in Arabia. Now, this subject is building. There's interest building. I have a great deal of information I have not yet presented, but I have, believe me, I have hours and hours and hours of material to present here. There's a rock inscription from the Jordanian desert which invokes Jesus and the name of Jesus. This is the rock here. It was discovered here. Okay, this is Petra. This is Saudi Arabia. It was discovered amongst these stones. They have found apparently thousands of similar kinds of inscriptions. What is important here is that there are crosses on this. These are Arabs that converted to Christianity in the 4th century at least. And it contains the name of Jesus, and the name of Jesus in the 4th century on this rock inscription is Isa, the name that is used in the Quran for Jesus. So the early Arabs were calling Jesus Isa, and you'll see the name is Sit here, Isa, this here, as you see it. It's in the Safaitic language, Safaitic, and it's Ise, which corresponds to the name given to Jesus in the Quran. It says, "Oh, Ise, help him against those who deny you." Now, what's interesting is this is a little to commemorate the death of someone important to this person. And notice, help him against those who deny you. They're speaking here of people who reject Jesus, even then in Arabia, when these heresies were at a boiling point already. Your thoughts on that, Thaddeus, before I go on?
Yeah, it's very interesting when we try to look at the origin stories of Islam, and we try to look at from a historical basis. Obviously, we can look at what Islam claims about its end origins, but when we try to actually look at the historical evidence, we find something very strange. We find that there is plenty of historical material from the 8th, 9th century. We find that there's plenty of historical material from the 3rd and 4th century. What we don't find is a lot of material from that foundational period, the 5th, 6th, 7th century.
Strangely missing.
Yeah, it's strangely missing. It's almost like it's been intentionally erased.
Yeah.
So when we find something like this rock inscription that has managed to survive, it can greatly alter our understanding of history.
And this is slowly happening. I have a great deal of material to present. I have not yet edited it, but man, I have a huge data dump on Christianity was present in Arabia. Even Paul was in Arabia, and there were many of these of the biblical characters that went to Arabia. There is history of this. We're starting to piece it together, and I need to discuss it. Okay, yeah, no, thanks. So yeah, well, Thaddeus was also instrumental in me getting, well, Thaddeus and Sonia Azam. I need to thank the both of you who encouraged me. Sonia was very encouraging as well to getting my channel going, and I've done so, and it's grown. Oh, guys, by the way, as you know, David Wood recently asked for people to recommend channels that he wants that you like, that he wants to promote. And if you guys can please give Thaddeus a thumbs up, just mention the name Reasoned Answers Apologetics in the chat on that video of his recently. Of course, I'd love you to give mine a shout out, so put us both down, because Thaddeus and I collaborate extensively. So just mention my name, my channel's under my name, and also just mention Thaddeus so that you can boost his visibility and hopefully get him a talk with David, and of course get him promoted. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I may have a couple words to say at the end of our presentation today about my attempts to get in touch with David. I've been working hard on that, so I might have a couple words, not directly related to the presentation today, but I might have a couple words at the end here. But getting back to what I was talking about, so I'm learning more about Islam, but I'm finding some things really hard to accept, not just from Lloyd, but especially stuff that Lloyd is giving. So, I'm hearing that Islam is based on authority, not based on truth. Well, what do I mean by that? I mean that Islam is based on following what your leader tells you, and not about investigating matters for yourself. It's based on reputation, making Islam look good. It doesn't really matter what is objectively true in the sense usually used in the West, but rather it matters what people say. And that's because Islam has redefined truth. Islam adheres to what could be called a majority or authority position of truth, that what is true is what the majority of scholars say is true. Most people would adhere to, in the West, would adhere to a correspondence theory of truth, that what is true is what corresponds to some physical reality, some objective reality in the world that's independent of your ideas. And Muslims, whether they realize it or not, are under a system where they believe that truth is dependent on what people think is true. This is a position that, just to be clear, this is a position that a few actual philosophers have held throughout history, but it's certainly not a major position. But because we don't really understand how Muslims view truth, we don't necessarily approach things from the right manner. So this is one thing I'm hearing, from a variety of sources.
So you mentioned,
and then Lloyd.
Sorry, go on, please. Go on. I'll interrupt later.
Okay, so then I'm talking to Lloyd. We're doing live streams. I'm hearing new material about Islam, and I put here that Lloyd had a much darker picture of Islam, that he viewed Islam for what it is. I'm just going to come out and say it. He viewed Islam for what it is: evil, horrible cult that demonstrably false, traps people. Keeps people subject to it. And he was saying some things that, didn't quite sound right. That they didn't make sense as a Christian, because they're so foreign to the way we think. Like some of these things were morally reprehensible, but some of them were neutral. Like he was saying things like the Quran is basically irrelevant to Islam. And I was like, yeah, that can't be true. Surely Muslims believe that the Quran is foundational to their religion. He was saying things like the opinion of scholars is more important than the words of the Quran or the words of Muhammad. So more important than the words of the Prophet, more important than the words of their God, is the opinion of the scholars. This is found in Sharia. It's found in the modern seerah biographies and so forth. And I'm just thinking, no, that can't be. They gotta view the scripture as foundational. That's the only thing that makes sense. That's how religions work. That's got to be the way that Islam works as well. And I mean, I was wrong.
So look, you were shocked. Well, what was your when I said things like the Quran's irrelevant? Just forget it. Imagine it doesn't exist. I know I've said things like many times on my channel. What was your impression? You were shocked, and then what made you like eventually realize, hold on, maybe I have a point here?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like a one light bulb moment. It's kind of an evolution over time. We continued to work together. We continued to have many conversations that were not recorded for YouTube. Just kind of working through the way Islam works. And I just started to see connections, see how what you're saying made a lot of sense. That actually, yeah, this explains the way Muslims and comments act. This explains the way Muslims preach. And this explains the way Muslims interact with Christians, the criticisms they give against Christians. So it just started to make sense. The more I heard, little by little, I came to say, maybe I am really just looking at this wrong. Maybe I really just don't understand what Islam is about. So in addition to neutral things like, the Quran is irrelevant, and I say neutral because what the religion is based on isn't really a matter of moral importance, right? If it's based on text A, well, then we look at whether text A is true. If it's based on text B, well, then we look at what text B says, and we make our decision there. So that's why I say it's kind of morally neutral. It's not really a criticism of Islam. It's just something that is totally foreign to my mindset. But then I'm also learning from Lloyd things that are really morally reprehensible, like that Islam teaches mandatory lying. And, he was reading the Sharia. I'm seeing the words, and I'm still having a hard time accepting them. I'm thinking, well, this is just opinion of one crazy person who wrote this book, which, I mean, logically, that could be the case. But as I've realized, in conversations with Lloyd and in conversations with ex-Muslims and just looking at how things fit together logically, I've come to realize this isn't really the case. That these aren't, fanatical fringe positions. These are normal orthodox positions of Muslims, at least Muslims in Muslim majority countries. Western Muslims are a different breed. They don't necessarily know and follow these things. Some do. Some are very secular. But Muslims in Muslim majority countries, they know this stuff. They accept it as perfectly ordinary. They accept it as morally good. Yeah. But they also know they're not supposed to talk about it.
It's illegal for Muslims to reveal the Sharia. It's treason according to Islamic law. You're revealing a weakness. Technically, it's not a secret. The Sharia is secret because to discuss it reveals a weakness that would put Islam in an embarrassing position. This is illegal, but also it's treason because you're revealing a weakness that could harm the agenda of the Ummah. So it is not lawful for Muslims to reveal. Now, of course, the Quran, they're not even allowed to share the Quran with non-Muslims, but that cat is out of the bag. Of course, that's too late now. They can't, the horse is out of the barn. However, I will state this very bluntly. Lying in Islam is not only permissible, it's halal, it is legal, it is in fact mandatory. I will say that again very bluntly. Lying in Islam is mandatory in Islamic law. It is a duty to lie. It is compulsory to lie. It is mandatory to lie. Do not mistake my words here. I have very, very detailed coverage of that with Thaddeus as well. There's a very good video that we did on that. I go through the Islamic law and I go through various aspects of it. The major form of lying in Islam is not taqiyya. That's a word you need to forget. You need to learn the word hiyal. H-I-Y-A-L. Hiyal. Anyway, thanks, man. That is back to you.
Yeah, and I've done a couple of videos on that as well fairly recently, such as Insane Islamic Lies Explained. But definitely all the credit goes to Lloyd for introducing this idea to me. As far as I can tell, he's the only critic of Islam who's really addressed this material. So I also was, hearing from Lloyd that Islam is a religion of law and lawyers. Now, this sounds similar to what I was just saying, but it's actually different. This is different than Islam being based on the opinion of human beings, on the majority scholarly opinion. This is addressing the way Muslims view the commands of their God. This is addressing the way Muslims approach life, and they don't have the same concept of what a moral principle is. They might use the same words, but they don't have the same concept. To them, a moral command is exactly equivalent to what we would call a law, that it's all about the exact wording, it's all about the exact circumstances, and different circumstances can have completely different laws. There doesn't have to be an underlying principle for them all. As long as it's legal, it's morally good. As long as there's a rule you can follow, or it's morally good.
Oh.
If there's a rule that tells you not to do something, then it's morally bad to do it. They're exactly equivalent. And this is completely different than the way that Christians and non-Christian Westerners think about morals.
Correct. Yeah. I want to say thank you to BMW635 for the donation. Thank you for the contribution. I really appreciate it. It's very kind. It goes towards the work that I do, to subscriptions and things like that. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jason
Lloyd
did not
wipe
the floor with Mary. He failed to show up. He's failed to show up to discuss Islam with me. He has failed to show up to discuss Islam with Thaddeus. He has failed to show up to discuss Islam with Mary. He's a coward. He runs away. I have not asked him for a debate. I've said, hey, please, I've asked him dozens of times. I said, meet with me, neutral platform. All we will do is we will just read through the Islamic laws, and I want to get your commentary. We'll discuss them. Joe Rogan has the biggest podcast in the world. He talks about things. He discusses things. You don't have to debate them. Just read what's on the page and tell me your thoughts. He refuses. He runs away. There's no excuses, but he talks a good game. But unfortunately, yeah, he is unwilling to show up. So
yeah, I mean that's actually it's an excellent example of how argumentation works in Islam. He didn't show up. It's objectively impossible that he could have won the debate. He wasn't there.
Yes.
Yet somehow he says that he wiped the floor with Mary for the debate he didn't show up to.
Yeah.
And why I said this is exactly excellent example about how Islam works. Facts are irrelevant. What's important is projecting confidence. What's important is projecting superiority. What's important is rhetoric, convincing people that you are right. You don't need arguments. You don't need facts. All you need is to be skilled at rhetoric.
Correct. If I may, can I show the audience something? So I want to show this is within the Islamic law. Okay. So notice here that this defines what Muslims must believe. So going to the reliance of the traveler. The basic obligation of Islam is to believe in everything brought by Muhammad everything, with absolute conviction, free of any doubt, right? They want you to believe in everything, free of doubt, with total conviction. Whoever does this is not obliged to learn evidence, right? The Prophet did not require of anyone anything but to believe with absolute conviction, free of doubt, with no need for evidence. What befits common people, and the vast majority of those learning or possessing sacred knowledge, is to refrain from discussing the subtleties of scholastic theology, the kalam as they say in Islam, basically to discuss theology lest corruption, which is difficult to eliminate, find its way into their basic religious convictions. So discussing Islamic theology will lead to doubt within Muslims. It is fitter for them to confine themselves to contentment with the above-mentioned absolute certainty with zero evidence. And I will show one more thing, and then I'll take your comment on that. I want to show you, notice here, this is unlawful knowledge, okay? Haram knowledge. It's illegal to know this. Notice here we have learning sorcery. Sorcery is illegal in Islam, in theory, not in practice. 2, magic, astrology. And then number 2 here is philosophy, that is. Philosophy is lumped in with magic, astrology, and sorcery. It's illegal for Muslims to learn to think correctly. Your thoughts?
Yeah, actually earlier you asked, how I began to change my view. And actually, this is probably one of the things that really was a wake up. Seeing, this command that Muslims shouldn't learn just made so much sense, because it explains why Islam is based on authority. It explains why Muslims will come into the chat, comment on your video, not address a point you said, and say, you need to debate Zakir Naik in order to disprove Islam. Why are you making videos instead of debating Zakir Naik? Or they'll come into a video that has nothing to do with Muhammad hijab or David Wood and be like, Muhammad hijab destroyed David Wood. Christianity is ended. And it's just looking at the behavior and seeing that, Muslims are commanded to have absolute confidence, and knowledge is discouraged, highly discouraged for the average person. There are, the elect few who
just pause
are
1 second,
allowed
guys.
to...
Safraz Hussein always says, Lloyd, debate Daniel Hakikachu, you scared pagan. Now, we don't kiss rocks, right? Don't forget that Islam's God is a rock, right? In fact, it's a rock that was split into 3 pieces and it's glued together with tar, right? Which loves a kissy, okay? Allah loves a kissy. The little rock loves a kissy. I'll excuse my French there. But also, I don't know who Daniel Hakikachu is. You are coming on my channel. You are constantly going on Thaddeus' channel to make comments. And yet when I say, well, meet me because you claim to have knowledge, you claim to be someone who's skilled in knowledge of Islam, and you keep on debating with me in the chat, you make claims, and I say, okay, well, let's look at what your scholars say in the Sharia, the fiqh. Unless you're claiming that your scholars are ignorant and you know more than your scholars, you have refused dozens of requests over months for just to meet with me and read through the fiqh with me. You are terrified. You are too much of a coward. You are a coward. I've invited you many times. If you are knowledgeable, why will you not meet me? So you will agree to meet me in your very next comment. You say, yes, I will meet with you and we will read through the fiqh. We will read through these manuals and discuss Islam from the scholarly perspective, and you will just give me your thoughts. We will read through the laws of obligatory lying, how Muslims are taught and trained to specifically lie. Okay? We will read through the laws of apostasy, which is the penalty is death, and we will ask, why do Muslims lie about this all the time? We will read through the laws of, how do I say this delicately, but legal prepubescent diddling of minors. In fact, even diddling of infants is legal in Islam, infant being defined in the Sharia as a baby in the cradle. This is legal. It is lawful. There's a word for that. It starts with the P, right? So we will discuss this. This is the word of your scholars. So please explain. Either you will agree to meet me and we'll set a date, or please ban him on the very next comment if he does not agree, because this is a waste of my time. Thanks, Thaddeus. Back to you.
Yeah, well, actually, Safraz is great for one thing. He's great for proving my point. He does this all the time in my live streams, and he just did it again. We're talking about what Islam teaches, and he comes in and says, you need to debate Daniel Pikachu. Okay. Thanks for nothing, Safraz. You proved that Islam is based on authority, not on arguments, just like I said.
But also notice it's illegal. It's fully illegal. He can face the death penalty for opening up these Islamic law manuals and revealing them live in public. He can be killed for that. So he cannot. He absolutely, positively cannot and will not do so. He has no authority because the opinion is of a non-Muslim, of a non-mujtahid is of no consequence. And I can actually show you that law directly in the fiqh. The opinion of a lay Muslim is of zero consequence. Thanks, Thaddeus. Back to you. Sorry. Let me just.
And just to be clear, if Hikachu lost the debate in such a dramatic fashion that even someone as clueless as Sapphiros had to admit it, it would be of no consequence to him. And the system is designed this way on purpose. He'll just reject Daniel. He won't reject the stupid, idiotic things that Daniel argues for. He'll just reject Daniel. The beliefs of Islam are always protected because they only have confidence in particular individuals. They don't have confidence in the things themselves. And we'll actually see that a little bit on this slide here, which I called an awakening. So over time, I began to realize that Islam is really, really that depraved. It's far more depraved than the so-called Islamic phobic attacks about Muslims being terrorists and committing jihad and so on and so forth. Intellectually and even morally, the actual foundations of Islam are so much more depraved that terrorism almost seems acceptable. That the very foundation of Islam is anti-intellectual, it's anti-reality, it's anti-Christ. Islam is the single worst religion on the planet.
It's not a religion.
Furthermore,
Islam doesn't even call itself religion. It called itself a deen. Can I make another just diversion? One more, last one, if I may. Islam does not call itself a religion. Now, unfortunately, in the West, we view the word, as Thaddeus correctly said earlier, they have the same words with completely different meanings. Islam is not a religion. It does not call itself a religion. It uses the word deen. I'm just going to bring this up here. Deen is a socio-political system, and it is a political framework for managing mankind's affairs, right? So it's there are two major Islamic dictionaries, the Al-Qamus al-Muhit and Lisan al-Arab. The Al-Qamus al-Muhit was Lane's lexicon, was the foundation for Lane's lexicon, right? The very famous book that is used for translations. There are four meanings of deen. Let's have a look. Subjugation and dominance, which includes ownership, government, administrative or legislative authority. None of this is in the New Testament. Jesus didn't bring a legal system. 2, obedience and bondage, subordination and dominance under the power of others. 3, rules and regulations, doctrine, ideology, tradition, and notice or religion, not and or. Religion is optional, okay? And reward and repayment, justice and accountability. Now notice the first meaning is subjugation or dominance, administration or legislative authority, to put pressure to be obedient, using power to enslave or to make one obedient, right? Dayan is used to indicate a person who dominates and rules over a state. That's a legal system. Think fascism, think communism, think Nazism. The second meaning is obedience and bondage, subordination and domination by someone, and bearing humiliation under subjugation and power of others. It says here, deen does not mean religion, it means obedience. I'll pause there and back to you. Sorry about the So I am going to ban you now, Saffraz. You have wasted my time sufficiently. So your comment is coming through, and I'm not going to. You have now wasted my time. So thank you and goodbye. Back to you, Thaddeus. Let me just put your slide back up.
I'm using the term. I used the term religion, but to be clear, Islam regularly redefines terms. That when I speak of Islam as a religion, I should probably say belief system, to be more general, because what they view as a religion is completely different than what Christians view as a religion. They will say comments like, Christianity is false because Islam is the only religion that's a complete basis for how to live your life, meaning it's the only religion that has detailed laws on every possible thing you'll face every day. It's the only system that tries to control every aspect of your life. It's the only system that does.
The Imams are the Pharisees of Islam.
Exactly. That it's the only religion that seeks to control your life. It's the only religion that doesn't allow you to think for yourselves. That's what they really mean when they say it's a complete system of life, and that's why it's true. And they do this on lots of other things. We believe in Jesus. Well, no, you don't. You believe in something completely different, and you call it Jesus. We're an Abrahamic religion. but what they don't tell you is we believe something completely different about Abraham, and we think you're not an Abrahamic religion. So they constantly redefine terms. So yes, absolutely, Islam is not a religion in the same sense of what we mean by religion. So when I should say Islam is the most evil belief system in the world. So in addition to being evil, though, I've learned that Islam is this way by design. We make fun of the stupidity of Muhammad, and rightly so. However, the religion of Islam, the belief system of Islam, the deen of Islam is very carefully crafted. It did, I believe, have some supernatural influence, just not the side of the battle between good and evil that Muslims believe. I believe that it's very specifically designed to combine just enough truth to fool people. Most of the things that it teaches are what normal people would consider good moral teachings. And it's very carefully crafted to attack the exact things that Christians find hard to understand. And they inherit lots of doctrines from Christianity that are unique to Christianity and Islam only. Like, for example, the virginity of Mary. No other religion in the world believes that, but Islam does. And so they say that, we're very similar. All you have to do is reject a few core beliefs. You have to reject that Jesus is God. You have to reject that Jesus died on the cross. You have to reject that Jesus rose from the dead. And you have to reject salvation by faith or grace and believe in salvation by works. And this has a certain appeal to people. People want to be responsible for their own salvation to some sense. So it has a certain appeal. And of course, it also makes various carnal promises, which, appeal to the same mindset. You do enough good things, and Allah's going to give you good things in return. That has a certain appeal to it. So it's extremely carefully crafted. It takes exactly anti-Christ positions on the core issues. It denies the divinity of Jesus. What do you see in every Muslim comment on our channels? Jesus isn't God because he used the bathroom. Jesus isn't God because he was born of a woman, and so on and so forth. What do you see about the crucifixion? What historians, atheist historians, agnostic historians, Hindu historians, Buddhist historians, every historian in the world says about the crucifixion. It's one of the most certain facts of history. What does Islam say? It didn't happen. And that Allah tricked people into believing it happened. What do they say about the resurrection of Jesus? Well, he didn't die, so therefore he wasn't raised. He was just assumed up into heaven bodily, and he'll come back one day and he'll die, and that's when he'll be raised. And because of this, they're rejecting what it means to be a Christian while appearing on the surface to be Christian-esque. And that is appealing to people who don't really understand Christianity, who don't really have, who haven't really placed their trust in Jesus, who haven't really accepted salvation by faith. It's very appealing because it seems to reject some of the things that Christians find hard to understand. And of course, they'll also attack the Trinity, which, whether Christians should find it hard to understand or not, they do. So what else have I learned? I've learned that Islam definitely is not the Quran, and it's not even the Sunnah. Islam is century upon century of collected tradition and collected legal rulings. It's the opinion of human beings, it's opinion of scholars, so-called scholars, over the years. And how do they decide whether something's true or not? How much they like it. So things that were once true are no longer true. Most of what Muslims believe about Muhammad doesn't come from the Hadith. It certainly doesn't come from the Quran. That basically doesn't describe him. It doesn't even come from the seerah literature written in the 9th, 10th, 11th century. It comes from modern propaganda biographies. It comes from modern works that make up stuff that sounds good to the modern ear. And that's what Muslims typically believe is the truth about Muhammad. In multiple talks with ex-Muslims from Muslim majority countries, I've confirmed that children are indeed taught to hate the other, to hate anyone who's not a Muslim, and especially to hate Christians. They're taught that Muslims are the best of all creatures, just like the Quran says, and that Jews and Christians are the worst of all creatures, just like the Quran says. They view Christians in particular as subhuman. They view Christians as disgusting, dirty creatures who are not worthy of anything but being ridiculed and maybe taking their money if you have the opportunity to put them in under subjugation and collect money from jizya. That's all Christians are useful for. They are subhuman creatures. This is how the average Muslim in a Muslim majority country views Christians. And because of that, they kind of assume that Christians teach the same things about Muslims. They assume that Christians go around talking about how dirty and disgusting Muslims are. They go around thinking that all Christians hate Muslims and all Christians are afraid of Muslims, and so on and so forth. And that's simply not the case. The average Christian, the average Westerner who isn't a Christian, does not care about Islam, does not care about Muslims. They're irrelevant. I'm sorry, but it's true. Most people in the West view Muslims as completely, totally irrelevant. It doesn't matter to us at all what they believe. It's a completely different mindset than what Muslims believe. And because of this, us who get into talking about Islam, us who become interested in outreach to Muslims, we approach things from a completely inadequate mindset because we do not understand what Muslims think about it. We do not understand what Muslims think about Christianity.
Agreed. I just want to address one thing in the chat. So INUS, you need to understand that Islam is derived almost word for word from Gnostic and heretical texts. It does not present Orthodox Christianity. In fact, it is directly contradictory to Orthodox Christian beliefs, and also it goes against Christian moral laws. Now, I'm not going to have an argument with you. I'll simply ban you because understand, I am not your friend, right? My job was to make sure that Muslims didn't murder people and didn't blow up very expensive military gear, public works, and infrastructure, right? And I was good at my job. So, understand, I know more about this subject than you do. I have detailed videos on this subject. You are misstating the facts. You are confusing yourself. So, do understand there are nuance, there are details here that you don't know. You're wrong. So, I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, and I'll just add, INUS, I think you probably came in late. I would suggest you go back to the beginning, and you'll see that I probably had similar opinions as you at one time. I certainly didn't believe anything as stupid as the Christian church intentionally created Islam or whatever nonsense you've been spewing. But I certainly had ideas about Islam being very similar to Christianity, having a lot in common. And when I actually looked into Islam, I discovered that was not the case. I was perfectly fine. I didn't need Islam to be completely different than Christianity. I mean, it was obviously false. And I had plenty of reasons to believe it was false that had nothing to do with criticizing its moral precepts, nothing to do with criticizing its foundational beliefs, nothing with claiming that it has a completely different mindset. The only reason I've adopted this position is because that's what the evidence shows. The evidence shows, and if you talk to an ex-Muslim from a Muslim majority country, they will confirm this, that Islam, it has a completely different way of viewing the world. Muslims in the West, they might view the world similarly to you, but they represent like 1% of all Muslims. Muslims in Muslim majority countries who are raised on Islam and they never have to deal with people offering different ideas completely agree with what I am saying today. They obviously, other than Islam being false, but they would agree that truth is based on what the scholars say. Truth is based on authority. That you determine who has the better argument by who has better rhetoric, who is more confident. How you talk about things, how you draw on emotions is how you determine truth. They would agree with that. I'm not saying anything that a Muslim who grew up in a Muslim majority country would disagree with, other than, of course, the actual criticism, the explicit statements about Islam being false and Muhammad being a disgusting human being and whatnot. They would absolutely agree that they believe Christians are disgusting, and they'd say that's because it's true. They wouldn't deny what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Now, my final point in my various awakenings in my 4 years of studying Islam is that leaving Islam is exactly equivalent to leaving a cult. How you define a cult, some people would rule out anything above a certain size as a cult, whatever. I don't care if you define it as a cult or not. That's not what's important. What I'm saying is that leaving Islam is exactly equivalent to leaving a cult. That people who leave Islam are socially ostracized. They're cut off from their communities.
Yeah.
They're disowned by their families. And they face physical, economic threats. If it's a country that's completely in compliance with Sharia, they're arrested and they are given some time to repent, depending on which scholar, a couple days, a couple weeks, whatever, given some time to repent. But if they don't repent, they are executed.
Yeah. Well, that's
and even if, most countries don't necessarily follow these laws carefully, because they have certain obligations to not alienate their Western allies that they need financially. But they certainly practice social ostracization. They certainly practice cutting people off their families. And this is true even in the West. Muslims who leave Islam in the West, they probably won't face physical threats. They might. It happens sometimes in the West. But they probably won't. But they will be disowned by their families. They will be ostracized by their community. They are now subhuman creatures. And not only are they subhuman creatures, they brought shame on their whole family by leaving Islam. They've made their whole family an embarrassment to the community.
Yeah.
By leaving
They've turned
Islam.
to the dark side, and this, it's very difficult for them.
So because of this, it's very, very difficult to leave Islam. It's difficult for anyone to change their beliefs, but it's so much more difficult for someone to leave Islam. Yet people are doing it. People are leaving Islam in record numbers. For the first 13 centuries of Islam, converts to other religions, people who became atheists, few and far between. In the last 100 years, explosion of people leaving Islam. Last 10 years, another explosion. It just grows and grows and grows every year. More and more people are leaving Islam because it's false. It can't hold up to scrutiny. And not only is it false, it's horrific. It is morally horrific. It's not just false, it's morally horrific.
Yeah, if I may, let me show something. This is a very short introduction. I'm going to be covering this, but in the future, this has already been done on Al-Fadi's channel, so you should see that next month. But this is Quran 65:4 explained within Islamic law. And I know Muslims will constantly go in circles and lie about this because it's embarrassing to Islam. But notice, Law N 9.2, a waiting period is obligatory for a woman divorced after intercourse, so after she has had sex, whether the husband and wife are prepubescent or not prepubescent, or one is prepubescent and the other one has reached puberty. So notice this very clearly explains that this is quite legal. This is perfectly legal, right? So yeah, prepubescent sex is perfectly legal within Islam, right? I also want to mention, you mentioned Abraham. So in Islam, they teach in the Quran 60 verse 4, that Abraham hates Jews and Christians. We are quit of you, right? And whatever you worship, we disbelieve in you, and between you and us enmity, which is in the dictionary as hostility, hatred, ill will, animosity, and antagonism has appeared. And abhorrence, they need to view us as abhorrent. Extreme repugnance, disgust, loathing, and abomination forever until you believe in Allah. So Abraham himself supposedly hates the Jews and Christians. This then became the doctrine of al-wala wal-bara, meaning disassociation and enmity, loyalty and disavowal, hatred of the other and love of Allah. Understand? So for instance, if you look at the doctrine as it's written by the scholars, after loving Allah and His Messenger, you are obligated to hate those who oppose Allah and His Messenger. You must hate the people of shirk. This obligation comes from Abraham, the creed we are ordered to follow. This is a corruption of the teachings of Abraham and the Bible.
Yeah, and Sarah said morally horrific. Wow, so specific. Sarah, why don't you go back and watch the presentation? There's plenty of specific things mentioned here, but that isn't even the subject here. I just love how people come in and they're like, because you didn't name every possible thing in this one live stream, and the one thing that I wanted to hear, you didn't do a good job. I have thousands of hours of content on the morally reprehensible nature of Islam. Thousands, a bit of exaggeration.
Actually,
hundreds, though. Hundreds of hours of content. I probably have 500-600 hours of content on the morally reprehensible teachings of Islam.
Yeah.
But because I'm explaining my personal journey and I just said horrific teachings, even though I mentioned multiple specific ones throughout this, somehow this is a reason to be mocked.
No, I think you may have misunderstood his comment, Thaddeus. I think you may have misunderstood. And also it's possible I may have misunderstood INUS. I may have misread his comment. But
well, if I misunderstood, I apologize. The text is hard. I guess it could have been read as an agreement, but I thought it was sarcasm. Yeah. So
I do want to mention one more thing, if I may. I'm not going to go into depth, but I could, but it's going to leave you feeling very ill. This is the Digest of Mohammedan Law. It is still in use in the Pakistani legal system, within the courts. They refer to this. Of course, they do not have full Sharia. They have partial Sharia. But notice this law. It says here, fourth, when a man has had sexual intercourse with a girl under the age of 9 years, and he has ruptured the parts, you can figure out what parts those are, it is unlawful for him to have further connection with her, but she is not released from her ties. In other words, he may not have sex with her again, this girl under the age of 9, but she's not released from her ties if connected with him by marriage or slavery. This tells us that marriage and sex with minors is legal. And of course, if you have slaves, girls, who are less than 9, this is also legal. If no rupture has taken place, the prohibition has not occurred according to the most valid opinion. So in other words, diddle away, right? Diddle away. And of course, this goes on. There's more and more laws like this. I'll just move this down. If a person has sexual intercourse with a minor girl, she's not required to do ablution, but to get into the habit, she should be made to bath. But notice, if a woman is underage, okay, actually, let me just load this slide. Why not? If a woman is underage, but not, am I showing this? Yes. If a woman is underage, but not so small that if one has intercourse with her, there's a fear of the vaginal tissues tearing so that the vagina and anus will virtually come together, then by insertion of your penis into a vagina, ablution, washing, will become obligatory on the man if he has reached the age of puberty. But if there's fear in a very minor girl, notice these are two different categories. This is a minor, this is a very minor. And when I say this, understand, infants are fair game. Infants are fair game. Understand? I'll leave that at that. But this is Islamic.
Yeah, I mean, you have to. They have minor, and then they have very minor. Yeah. Getting back to my last point here, even when a Muslim does leave Islam, even when they apostatize in the face of all these horrible consequences, very often Christianity is still completely off the table for them. They won't even consider Christianity because of what they've been taught from a child, because of the very antichrist nature of Islam. They are taught that of all the people in the world, Christians especially are the most vile. Unless, of course, they live in close proximity to the nation of Israel, then it's the Jews who are the most vile. But it's going to be the Christians in most of the world, and in the countries immediately surrounding Israel, it's going to be the Jews who are the most vile. But either way, the Jews and the Christians are the worst of all peoples in the world. That's the last thing you'd want to do.
Worst of creatures.
It'd be better to be dead than to convert to Christianity.
Yeah, no, it's horrific. No, thank you, Thaddeus. That was very powerful testimony, and you've raised some really strong points. Hopefully, I've added to that conversation and not meandered, straight too far. But
yeah, it's been good. I do have one final slide on my conclusions, if you like.
Sure, please. Yeah, we've gone longer than anticipated. I thought we'd do an hour, but we've gone a tad longer than that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you got me riled up. So.
Yeah. Okay. Speak faster.
No, it's great.
Talk faster.
Great. So conclusion. Most Muslims are taught that Christians believe lies about Islam, that Christians believe Muslims are horrible, and so on and so forth, that Christians are obsessed with Islam, that Christian churches teach against Islam all the time. Well, ironically, they are right about one thing. Most Christians are taught lies about Islam. They're just not taught the lies that Muslims think. We're taught the lies that Islam is basically a decent religion, that Islam is basically equivalent to Christianity, that all you have to know Islam is know that Muhammad's its prophet and that they follow the Quran. And that is not Islam, and that is a bold-faced lie.
Yeah, we're lied to by the Muslims.
Islam is, sorry?
We're lied to by the Muslims about Islam.
Yes. Obviously these things aren't directly coming from Muslims, generally speaking. They're coming from pop culture, they're coming from the media, but ultimately they go back to Muslims. They go back to Muslims who were very smart and very clever and manipulated the public discourse to the point where we're talking about irrelevancies instead of about what Islam really stands for. Second conclusion is that Islam is pure evil. It is an anti-Christ and anti-Christian religion to its core. It's not just wrong. It's not just evil. It is anti-Christian explicitly. It is anti-Christ explicitly. Whatever similarities there are between Islam and Christianity are trivial. And indeed, they're often due to direct borrowing, directly taking certain doctrines from Christianity in an attempt to appeal to Christians, while denying the core doctrines, and not just denying them, but teaching the direct opposite. The exact opposite of what Christianity holds most dear is what Islam teaches on core issues.
Yeah.
It is extremely difficult for Muslims to leave Islam, and the well has been poisoned against Christianity specifically. The picture looks pretty dark. It looks pretty bleak. It looks like there are billions of Muslims that are reproducing at a fast rate, which means Islam is the world's fastest growing religion. But it's not. It's not what it appears to be. Islam is very vulnerable. Islam is very weak. It has no ground to stand on. It has no intellectual ground to stand on. It has no moral ground to stand on. And Muslim leaders understand this to some degree. This is why you see riots. This is why you see people being riled up and made to be violent in response to what are comparatively minor criticisms of Islam, making fun of stuff, the kind of thing that a Christian would barely even notice if someone did it against Christianity or against Jesus. And it's because they want to prevent there from being any discussion of Islam, because they know fundamentally that it's weak. They know that it doesn't stand up to the kind of truth that the Western world believes in. And they know that they have no military strength either, that the West controls all of the military might of the world. And so they do what they can. They hold on. They try to prevent Muslims from realizing it. And we're seeing signs it's not working. Muslims are leaving Islam in vast numbers, but they're not necessarily accepting Christianity. The only actual hope for Muslim souls, leaving Islam is of some political benefit, it's of some social benefit, it's of some benefit to the world, but the only actual hope for their souls is evangelism by Christians, like me, like you. We need to get out. We need to share the gospel. We need to take this material. We need to share it with Muslims. Not everyone's called to be an evangelist. Not everyone's called to start a YouTube channel. Not everyone's called to do public speaking. But everyone is called to share the gospel. Everyone is called to share the gospel with people in their lives. Share the gospel with Muslim coworkers. I'm not saying go out and start blasting away at their prophets. Start by having a friendly conversation and gently work in criticisms. Express your desire to learn their beliefs. Genuinely have genuine conversations, but share the gospel with Muslims. Muslims are not going to heaven. They are going to hell. That is the truth. And if you don't care, then there's something wrong with you. Every Christian should care about saving unbelievers. And that's it for me.
Well, thank you. That's really powerful testimony. And an interesting exploration today. So hopefully as an audience, hopefully you guys enjoyed that, learned something. And I'm really glad to finally have Thaddeus on the channel. We've been discussing this for a very long time. And it's, and of course, then you have my my typical I wonder what will happen if I go here. Oh no, that doesn't look so good. I need to fix that up. Yeah, I'll have to fix that. So, yeah, hopefully that was educational for everyone. I need to, yeah, if I had taken time prior to, if I wasn't running late, I would have set the stream up correctly because OBS needs manual tuning, and I did not do that. So my apologies. Yeah, I was just thinking of doing one little thing as a to end off. This is the standard sort of merry-go-round. If you want to understand Islam, ask a Muslim. Hello, my friend. What? Islam, of course I can help. Islam, it's a religion of peace. The Quran is the word of Allah, inerrant word of Allah, a guide to all aspects. So perfectly beautiful, anyone can understand it. I've read the Quran, there are contradictions. You don't understand it, you need to understand the context. Where do I find that? In the Hadith. I've read those too. There's some pretty barbaric stuff in there. That's not in the Quran. The Quran is the true source. But you said, look at the Hadith. I have some on my phone. Hold on, look at this one. No, not that one. That one's not valid. So how do you know which ones are valid? You need to be an Islamic scholar to have studied the text for many years. I listened to some scholars. Look at this guy. He has a PhD. He says that prescription for that stuff on barbaric death in the Hadith is valid. Not that scholar. He spreads a lot of lies. He spreads a distorted version of Islam. Well, he seems to be quoting the Hadith for the justification. These other scholars refer to him. How do you know which scholars to believe? If in doubt, go back to the Quran. The Quran's the true source. Okay, let's look at the Quran. These verses are pretty barbaric, and they say just what that scholar said. You atheist, you don't understand the Quran. Well, why are you getting upset? I'm just following along with what you're telling me. You seem to be going in circles. You really said we need to look outside the Quran to understand it, to the Hadith and the scholars. Then only the Quran. Now something else. You have hatred in your heart. You're not worth talking to. Goodbye. Now you understand Islam.
And this is obviously a joke, but it's like all good jokes, it is founded on truth. This is kind of the way conversations with Muslims go. I like to summarize it as Islam, the religion where everyone is a liar and you can't trust anything, but it's still 100% true, because Muslims, well, whenever you point out a source, they'll say, we don't believe that source, give us a different source, go to this, you go to that. We don't believe that source.
What about the Sahih Hadith?
That person's
no, that's
a liar.
Da'if.
He made up lies about Islam, and so on and so forth.
Bukhari was wrong. That's Da'if Hadith. But it says Sahih. No, I will post this on my community page, BMW and others. I'll post this on the community page, so watch for that. Yeah, so yeah, everything in Islam is false or weak, but Islam is true. Yeah.
Yep, that's pretty much it. One quick word from me. Right after this, I'm going to release a new video on my channel. I would post the link, but I am not a moderator, so I can't post the link. I don't know if Lloyd wants to fix that. But
seriously, you should be able to post links in the chat. I do allow links in the chat.
I'll try. I don't know if it went through or not. I gave it a try. You can never tell on your own end if it went through, so.
Yeah, we need to bring Thunderous on. Yeah, guys, I've had some issues. I've had some things that I've been very, very busy, so I haven't had time to do much. But yeah, I haven't seen your comment post, unless you just drop it in the chat to me in Skype, and I'll just drop it in here.
Yep, that works.
Yeah, just drop it in Skype, and I will
chat.
Yes.
So I am releasing a video. As you've probably heard, David Wood is deleting his channel. He plans to delete his channel. I'm releasing a video proposing a creative alternative to him. I don't know if he'll watch it, but I'm hopeful that I can get his attention. I compiled some statistics for the channel recommendations, and I sent that to him as well. So I've been trying to get in touch with Dave for a while. I've never directly spoken to him, but I've said, through third parties, he said that he's interested. We'll see if he and I ever do anything together or not. Have a great day, and God bless.
Thanks, guys. So yeah, I think we can end here. So thank you very much for coming on, Thaddeus. This has been so educational and interesting. I'm glad I was a positive influence, and I mean, thank you for listening to me, entertaining me, and guys, hopefully this was entertaining and educational. And yeah, Thaddeus, unfortunately, yeah, I'm sorry about the OBS issues. I will fix that at another time. So thanks, guys. So everyone, take care, and we shall see you next time. And go watch the video on Thaddeus' channel. Links in the description, and I just dropped the link in the chat for the new video. All right, take care, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
See you soon.